Cavalleria Rusticana by Pietro Mascagni. That glorious outpouring of melody, surely one of the most ravishing tunes ever written, points to the prime reason for the continuing popularity of Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana, the extraordinary wealth and quality of its tunes. Another reason is the melodramatic power of its story, a true tale of blood and thunder, and, as such, a fine example of the occasionally reviled school of opera known as the verismo. The title Cavalleria Rusticana translates a little too easily as rustic chivalry. I say too easily because of something language teachers call false friends, words or phrases that look familiar to the English speaker but mean something less obvious. In French, assister ought to mean to help, but most unobligingly means to attend or to be present. In Italian, caldo should indicate the cold tap, but doesn't, quite the opposite. So with opera titles. It is easy to translate Donizetti's L'Elisir d'Amore as the elixir of love, but more helpful to say the love potion. Easy to translate Verdi's La Forza del Destino as the force of destiny, but more accurate to say the power of fate. So with Mascagni's opera, where Cavalleria means not chivalry in the medieval sense, so much as code of honour, in the sense familiar to many from mafia movies. And rustic sounds too cosy. The sense of the title is better if clumsily rendered as the honour code of country people. Like Leoncavallo's Pagliacci, with which it is so often paired in the opera house, Cavalleria Rusticana is the sole surviving work of its creator. Mascagni and Leoncavallo each wrote a number of operas, some popular enough in their day, but none truly lives on from either composer except for these heavenly twins, as the pairing of Cav and Pag is often called. Not that having only one opera to your credit puts you in an inferior league of opera composers. Beethoven has only his Fidelio in the operatic repertoire, Debussy his Pelléas and Melisande, and some composers who wrote many operas like Bizet and Berlioz are still remembered, the odd revival apart, for only one, Bizet for Carmen and Berlioz for the Trojans. Let us step back a moment and see where Cavalleria Rusticana fits into the long and often chaotic history of Italian opera. As the date, 1890, tells us, pretty late. Opera began in Florence in 1597 and was developed mainly in Venice through the next century, reaching an early peak with the great works of Monteverdi and Cavalli. Though opera is a child of the Renaissance, that brilliant rebirth of interest in the values of ancient Greece and Rome, the art form properly owes its early maturity to the Baroque period. The word Baroque conjures up images of wonderfully over-decorated Roman churches, palaces glittering with gilded carvings and stucco, and a sort of exuberance miles removed from the leaner, cleaner lines of the Renaissance. That exuberance is present in the music. Here, in a dance by Jean-Baptiste Lully, an Italian export to the court of Louis XIV. The Baroque, in art and in music, occupied most of the 1600s and much of the 1700s, before being superseded by the classical era, when opera composers built upon the famous reforms of the German composer Gluck. These led to a less florid, though by no means austere, style of opera. Here is a sample of Gluck's Orfeo ed Euridice, the Dance of the Blessed Spirits, which illustrates this tendency for purity without austerity. Another peak is found in the superb works of the mature Mozart, especially the three operas he wrote to Italian libretti by Lorenzo da Ponte, The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte. Here is a powerful reminder of Mozart's majestic writing for soprano, in a short extract from the aria Come Scoglio in Così fan tutte. Opera was clearly developing roots and branches in other countries, but the beginning of the 1800s sees the spotlight return to Italy with that glorious period we call the Bel Canto. Three figures dominate the scene: Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti. And while it is tempting to bracket them together, each has his own very distinct style, often different from what may be assumed. Rossini wrote many more serious operas than he ever did comic ones, but is best remembered for his Barber of Seville, the most popular comic opera ever written. And no wonder. Bellini, perhaps most successfully of the three, captured the notion that beauty of line and tonal quality were the very essence of bel canto, as here in La Sonnambula. And Donizetti, admired for his serious operas like Lucia di Lammermoor, is loved for his comic ones like Don Pasquale and The Elixir of Love, The Love Potion, with its famous tenor cavatina. For the rest of the century, Italian opera is dominated by Giuseppe Verdi. From his earliest successes, such as Nabucco, Verdi's dominance continued through his great middle period triumphs, like Il Trovatore. And what we might call his political operas, where the usual eternal triangle of star-crossed lovers is worked out against a huge canvas of political turmoil. Operas like Aida, in which the triangle of Radames, loved by both Aida and Amneris, takes place during a war between Egypt and Ethiopia, the principals sometimes appearing as pawns in a great game. Operas like Don Carlos, too, where the triangle is more dangerous still because the hero, Don Carlos, is in love with his father's wife, and his father is the repressive Habsburg King of Spain and the Netherlands. Operas like Un ballo in maschera, a masked ball, where the trio of king, courtier, and courtier's wife play their tragic game against a backdrop that includes conspiracy and assassination at the Swedish court of the philandering King Gustav III. Coming to Verdi's last two operas, Otello and Falstaff, one is intensely political, and the other is not. But by the time these were written, Verdi had achieved his political destiny. Italy was a united country, and the need for unification propaganda had receded. The other great figure we have to consider in any discussion on Italian opera, however short, is Puccini. Cavalleria Rusticana, 1890, falls just before Puccini had his first great success with Manon Lescaut, and a few years before his richest vein of popular works, La Bohème in 1896, Tosca in 1900, and Madame Butterfly in 1904. All three of these are usually described as belonging to the Verismo school of opera. This makes Cavalleria Rusticana a pioneer of this effective, if, as I mentioned, occasionally reviled school. I say reviled because there will always be people who despise anything that is overly emotional, any work where the heart is worn prominently on the sleeve. But look, if you will, at this progression. Early opera was usually set to classical themes, stories of Greek gods and heroes, distant, noble, and uncontroversial, Monteverdi's very human Coronation Epopeia being the notable exception. With Mozart, we see opera beginning to reflect the real lives of red-blooded people like Figaro and Susanna, Leporello, Don Giovanni's servant, and the young lovers in Così fan tutte. Rossini, too, has his earthy moments in his comedies, which, though often rooted in the traditions of commedia dell'arte, have their contemporary domestic spin. It is usual to see the genesis of verismo in the writings of Émile Zola, the novelist who ruthlessly depicted the seamier side of French society in the 19th century, with such novels as Germinal and Nana. In Italy, the novelist and playwright Giovanni Verga fulfilled the same function, and it was his play, Cavalleria Rusticana, that provided the basis for Mascagni's opera. But do the roots of verismo not lie earlier than Zola and Verga? If verismo is defined as true to life, or reflecting the real concerns and struggles of ordinary people, depicted in a realistic, non-idealized way, we can find examples in operas long before Zola wrote or Mascagni composed. Mozart depicted real life, if rather more decorously. Verdi's La Traviata, dating from 1853, was more than true to life. It was actually the truth, or at least the version of it as narrated in the kiss-and-tell novel The Lady of the Camellias by the French novelist Alexandre Dumas the Younger. Verdi shocked respectable Paris by choosing to set a story about a call girl. In earlier days, murder and mayhem usually took place in the wings, but Verdi has his heroine die painfully and at length of consumption on stage, in full view of the audience. But perhaps the real precursor of the verismo movement in opera was Bizet's Carmen, maybe the first truly verismo work of the lyric theatre. Again, conventional morality was shocked. And morality in France in the 1870s was very conventional, as Bizet chose for his heroine a gypsy, a member of a despised and feared underclass of vagrants. Furthermore, he depicts her as an attractive and amusing character. By the time she has to meet her fate, it has been pre-echoed in the prelude and throughout the unfolding drama. She does so not in the anonymous decency of the green room, but on stage, at the end of a scene in which she is baited and stalked by her half-crazed lover, Don José. Of course, we have seen death on stage before Carmen. Don Giovanni's slaying of the Commendatore is one example, but that was in a duel between professional fighters, albeit unmatched opponents. Carmen's death is a sordid sex murder. Before we look at Cavalleria Rusticana itself, let's begin with a few words about Mascagni, and a word or two from him. He was born on December the 7th, 1863, in the Tuscan town of Livorno, 5 years after Puccini, and very close to his birthplace of Lucca. Mascagni would live to see the end of the Second World War in Europe, dying in Rome on August the 2nd, 1945. This long span allowed him to live well into the age of electric recording, and in addition to using the modern Naxos recording for this introduction, we have the unusual opportunity to draw from an historic recording conducted by Mascagni himself, with his own hand-picked cast. There is a short speech contained in the supplementary material of the historic discs in which Maestro Mascagni addresses us, his dear listeners, gives his name, and says how delighted he is to have been invited by his master's voice, nobile voce del padrone, to make this recording to mark the 50th anniversary of Cavalleria Rusticana's premiere.
Ascoltatrici ed ascoltatori gentili, sono Pietro Mascagni e vi rivolgo la parola per dirvi che la mia Cavalleria Rusticana compie i 50 anni ed è legata nella mia memoria a tante dimostrazioni di simpatia che non ho potuto resistere all'invito della nobile voce del padrone e mi sono deciso a presentarla in dischi per intero e per la prima volta sotto la mia personale direzione. La mia creatura, che prende vita dagli artisti più celebrati e da masse orchestrali e corali che non hanno rivali nel mondo, rimarrà pertanto quale immagine mia meglio e più di qualsiasi ritratto con firma autografa. Ed io, che di autografi ne ho fatti tanti, non ne ho mai rilasciato alcuno con maggior piacere, perché è il più vivo che si possa dare ed è quello che meglio mi rappresenta nella doppia veste di autore e di direttore della musica mia. Vi saluto cordialmente prima di alzare la bacchetta.
The one point that haunts any discussion of Mascagni's career is the tragic irony that in a long and busy life, in which he held numerous posts, in which he conducted important performances of other composers' works, and wrote many operas, only this one short work, written in his youth as his entry in a competition, has kept his name alive. As he himself ruefully remarked, "It was a pity I wrote Cavalleria first. I was crowned before I was king." He studied at the Milan Conservatory, and in his late teen years produced a string of minor musical works for voice with different instrumental accompaniment. In his early 20s, he held a number of musical posts, gave piano lessons, and did the usual chores young musicians then, and now, must do to keep the wolf from the door. He married in 1888, and in that same happy year read an announcement in the magazine Teatro Illustrato that the publisher, Sanzogno, was organising a competition for new works. Mascagni set an abridgment of Giovanni Verga's play Cavalleria Rusticana, and when it received its premiere in Rome on May the 17th, 1890, the success was enormous. So, to tie in two threads of our narrative, dear old Mascagni and his sole masterpiece, here is the maestro himself, conducting his great work. Within the year, it had been played in Florence, Turin, Bologna, Palermo, Milan, Genoa, Naples, Venice, and Trieste. In December of the same year, the great Gustav Mahler himself presented the opera in Budapest. And in the early months of 1891, it reached Monaco, St. Petersburg, Dresden, Buenos Aires, and even that musical bastion, Vienna. Few operas have had such a triumphant reception, and it is not hard to see why. The story is powerful, short, has richly drawn characters, and virtually encapsulates all that we think we know about Sicilian life, its traditions, its code of honour, and the ongoing proximity of violent death. It is hardly surprising that Francis Ford Coppola would choose a performance of this most Sicilian of operas as the dramatic and musical backdrop to his movie Godfather III, and that several major characters from Pope John Paul I to a brace of mafia dons should be bumped off to its melodic strains. Mascagni, as we have noted, would never equal the success of this first work, though the opera which followed 18 months later at the same Roman theatre, the Teatro Costanzi, better known nowadays as the Rome Opera House, enjoyed some success. It even gets the occasional respectful revival at festivals where unusual repertoire is enjoyed. It is called L'Amico Fritz, and we are lucky to have an old historic recording of Mascagni himself conducting the famous intermezzo. It would be tiresome and ultimately depressing to catalogue the long series of Mascagni's attempts to recreate the success of his first opera, and he seems to have suffered the same fate with his opera Iris that Leoncavallo suffered with his Bohème, of having the work swept off the stage by the Puccini juggernaut. Iris has an oriental setting, and a story which foreshadows that of Madame Butterfly, the opera which would supplant it. The Hymn to the Sun from Iris has also survived in a somewhat grainy historic recording, but one to treasure, as it is again conducted by Mascagni himself. There is an old theatrical chestnut, which might bear retelling here, about Mascagni and a barrel organist. In the distant days when new operas constituted popular culture, the best tunes would be played on the barrel organs of Italy's streets the morning after a premiere. Mascagni was walking to the theatre on such a morning when he heard one of his tunes being, quite literally, ground out. He stopped and told the barrel organist to take the tempo a bit faster. "Who are you to tell me how to play my barrel organ?" the man asked. And Mascagni replied, "I am Mascagni." When Mascagni was walking home later that morning, he saw that a sign had been posted on the barrel organ saying, "By appointment to Mascagni." It is as well to bear that tale in mind when listening to Mascagni's own conducting of his work, as it may seem a bit on the leisurely side. But then composers are not always the greatest exponents of their own music, either because they may not be conductors of the first rank, or more probably because a second and complementary intellect can find more nuances to emphasize. Both Igor Stravinsky and Benjamin Britten have left a large archive of recordings of their own works, though most critics would argue that their quality of interpretation has been surpassed by other conductors. One black mark against Mascagni occasionally arises. When Toscanini quit La Scala in protest at the policies of fascist Italy, Mascagni stepped in and flourished all through the fascist era. This may seem rather disreputable, but composers usually make pretty poor judges of politics, Verdi apart. Mascagni's actions were no different from some German artists, including Richard Strauss, who collaborated musically with the ruling government. The short prelude to Cavalleria Rusticana is atmospheric, and fulfills that most valuable function of introducing a number of leading melodies. We could have chosen to stay with the historic recording under the baton of the composer, but compared with the modern recording, the reduced opulence of sound is a disadvantage. The attraction of hearing how Mascagni intended us to hear his masterpiece is, in my view, overtaken by the need to hear the score with maximum clarity. Let us make the contrast. As the curtain rises, we hear Turiddu, off-stage, serenading his beloved Lola to harp accompaniment. In the historic recording, the tenor lead, Turiddu, is taken by the legendary Beniamino Gigli. By contrast, here is the same passage sung by Giacomo Aragal in the modern recording, to which we shall adhere from now on. A particular attraction of the opera is the colourful way it depicts life in small-town Sicily. In contrast to Turiddu's nocturnal serenade, we next see and hear the village awakening to life, or new life if you prefer, for it is Easter Sunday. Mascagni is especially clever at capturing there the exoticism of Sicily, an island much conquered and invaded from the early Greeks through the Romans, the Byzantines, later the Muslims, and then the Normans, waves of invaders and commercial settlers who left their mark. The Arabic element is especially strong. Notice both the U ending to the name Turiddu, which in mainland Italian would be Turiddu, and the Eastern flavour of the orchestral harmonies. It helps to remember a little history to the events of Cavalleria Rusticana. The characters are a richly drawn group of Sicilian townspeople, and the action is contemporary, or timeless. The principal tenor, I hesitate to call him hero, is Turidu, who had loved Lola prior to his departure for military service. By the time he returned, she had married another man, Alfio, and Turidu fell back, so to speak, on another girl, Santuzza. But after taking her honour, by taking her virginity he made her soiled goods, as the saying went, he decided he still wanted Lola. His mother, Mamma Lucia, completes the quintet of characters, which is supported by a large chorus of townspeople. The people move away from the square, and Santuzza, the main female character, enters. Again, heroine hardly applies, and approaches the inn of Mamma Lucia, Turidu's mother, to ask where her son is. Santuzza regards herself as a sinner and outcast. She is unconvinced by the news that he is out of town, as someone had spotted him in town the previous evening. This first confrontation of the two women is full of menace and the mutual suspicion of fond mother and discarded lover. These gloomy exchanges are interrupted by the arrival of the blustery Alfio, a carter who has a fine macho number punctuated by the cracking of his carter's whip, the jingle of carriage bells, and some very cheerful syncopated backing from the chorus men. A real show-off piece, this, for any baritone.
Cavallo scalpita, i sonari squillano, scacchi la frusta e là. Soffi il vento gelido, cada l'acqua nevichi, ma che cosa fa? Il cavallo scalpita, i sonari squillano, scacchi la frusta e là. Scacchi la frusta e là. E là.
And now we have another of the confrontations that are central to the tragedy unfolding. Alfio asks Mamma Lucia if she has received the wine shipment, and she replies that no, Turidu has not yet returned. Yet Alfio says that he saw Turidu near his own house that morning. Mamma Lucia questions this, and Santuzza tells her to be silent. Tacete.
Mamma Lucia, avete ancora di quel vecchio vino?
Non so, Turidu è andato a provvederne.
Se sempre qui, l'ho visto stamattina vicino a casa mia.
Come?
In a brilliant stroke of theatre, this loaded revelation is interrupted by the organ from the church as the crowd assembles for one of the two big production numbers in the opera. This is the Easter hymn, and it, along with the intermezzo later on, account in large part for the enduring popularity of the work. It is imbued with a kind of simple peasant devotion, and begins as, off stage, the chorus, in the church, sings the medieval hymn of Regina Caeli, Queen of Heaven, punctuated by cries of Alleluia. Santuzza and Mamma Lucia, outside in the square, then join in the great chorus hymn to the good news of the resurrection. Inneggiamo, il Signor non è morto. Rejoice, for the Lord is not dead. Music, I think you will agree, of almost overpowering religious intensity. Although the stage directions would seem to imply an off-stage chorus, all stage directors mount at this point one of those triumphalist processions, which are a speciality of the Catholic Church. But what projects the scene into the emotional stratosphere is this. Santuzza, the sinner, the abandoned woman, takes up the great melody to project the hymn to new heights of emotion. An enjoyable aspect of Verismo opera is this combination of sin and sanctity, a feature of Italian melodrama then and now. Witness the mafia hoodlums in The Godfather, devoutly crossing themselves between shootouts. Puccini, of course, does it best in Tosca, as Scarpia lusts after the lady against the backdrop of a massive Te Deum from assembled clergy. So, at this holiest moment of the Catholic year, Santuzza explains to Mamma Lucia in her great aria Voi lo sapete that Turiddu used to love Lola, that Lola married the carter Alfio, and that Turiddu sought consolation with her, Santuzza. This, she explains, has made Lola jealous. So Santuzza is now both an ex-virgin and a woman scorned. In opera, as in life, a lethal mix. The depth of her feelings is already clear from the orchestral introduction. Santuzza narrates the whole sorry story in music of immense vocal power and asks Mamma Lucia to help her recover Turiddu's affections. There is a short incident now as Santuzza confronts Turiddu with the lie that he has been out of town on wine business. He had been spotted near Alfio's house, but he denies all, of course. At this point, Lola, the other woman, enters singing a pretty little number in praise of a lily or iris, symbol inappropriately, in this case, of the Virgin Mary. Santuzza says to Lola that only those in state of grace, not unshriven sinners, should go to church. But Lola's conscience is clear, and she goes into Mass. Turiddu angrily rebukes Santuzza for her remarks, and she responds, pleading her love for him in one of the opera's many notable tunes, which will return later as the material for the famous intermezzo. Ultimately, what makes any opera popular is its melodic invention, the number of great tunes, and by that measure, Cavalleria Rusticana is a winner. Turiddu quite literally casts Santuzza aside, sealing his own fate as he does so, because the happy-go-lucky Alfio strolls into the square on the way to church and is met by Santuzza, who tells all. The stricken Alfio promises revenge on Turiddu. After this impassioned scene, there follows the orchestral interlude called the Intermezzo. It is enchanting to listen to this part, at least initially, conducted by the master himself. And if you think the tempo on the slow side, remember the cautionary tale of the barrel organist. Now we'll let the modern recording take over. The church service finished, we have a reprise of the cheerful and atmospheric music which depicts the comings and goings of the village. That quality of the exotic, an Arabian influence which invests much of Sicilian history and culture, is heard again in an attractive little chorus as the people head home. A casa, for that Lucullan Easter lunch, which is the reward of the devout. Lola and Turiddu come out of church together. But Lola heads off home to be with Alfio, and Turiddu devotes his efforts to getting roaring drunk. Drinking songs are a staple of opera and operetta, of course, and this is a fine one. The drink also fulfills two dramatic functions. It heightens Turiddu's belligerence, and, as the porter says in Shakespeare's Macbeth, it provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. It does indeed diminish his performance in the duel that follows, but for the moment all is bibulous pleasure.
Viva il vino spumeggiante, nel bicchiere scintillante, come il riso dell'amante, mite infonde il giubilo. Viva il vino spumeggiante, nel bicchiere scintillante, come il riso dell'amante, mite infonde il giubilo. Viva il vino che è sincero, che ci alieta ogni pensiero e che affoga l'umor nero dell'ebbrezza tenera. Viva il vino che è sincero, che ci alieta ogni pensiero e che affoga l'umor nero dell'ebbrezza tenera.
When Alfio enters and is offered a drink, he insultingly refuses. Alfio challenges Turiddu to a duel, as demanded by the Sicilian code of honour contained in the title, and Turiddu makes to embrace Alfio and bites his ear as indication that he accepts. All is set for the tragic denouement as Turiddu greets his mother and tells her, "Wow, that wine was strong." Listen as the orchestra depicts the spinning in his head.
Mamma! Mamma! Quel vino è generoso!
In a last wish, Turiddu, who has said he needs to step outside for some air, tells his mother that if he doesn't make it back, she must look after Santuzza as if she were her daughter. Turiddu bids his mamma a last farewell and rushes off. The orchestra gains in power, depicting the offstage duel. Santuzza enters, and the orchestra boldly announces the culmination of the fight. Then a chorister, in what must be the most pivotal non-credited role in an opera, shrieks that Turiddu has been killed, and the orchestra thunders out a sort of fate motif as we learn that rustic chivalry, the code of honour, has taken its course. Mascagni, as we've said, would never again enjoy such success, but we have to admire the fact that his long working life spans the period from the end of the 19th century to post-fascist Italy. In 1940 he made the historic recording we heard earlier. In 1943 he made his last appearance at La Scala with L'Amico Fritz. He directed his last Rome opera season as Italy was falling apart, in 1943 to 1944. It was a long life, but it is hard to believe that it was an especially happy one, haunted always by the success of this youthful work, which was written as an entry in a competition. How often he must have been asked, "When shall we have another Cavalleria Rusticana?" He died on August 2nd, 1945, amid the ruins of fascism. And had he been a more dedicated follower of that movement, he might have had that disappointment to add to his name. One suspects rather that he was no more politically involved or opportunistic than many other artists before or since, who are anxious to practice their art and not too concerned with the political conditions. Mascagni was buried in Rome, but later exhumed and brought home to Livorno, where he now lies, his large output of operas all forgotten, except for this single, brilliant survivor.